The morning started like any other morning in the small town of Millbrook, Ohio. Jake Carter was sitting at his kitchen table, drinking his coffee. He was 34 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes. He worked at the Millbrook water plant. His job was simple. He checked pipes, ran tests, filled out paperwork. He had done this job for 11 years. He liked it because it was quiet. His daughter, Lily, was 7 years old. She was sitting across from him, eating cereal. She had her mother's eyes, big and brown and full of questions. Her mother, Dana, had passed away 2 years ago from cancer. It had been just Jake and Lily since then. They had a routine. Jake made coffee. Lily ate cereal. They watched 15 minutes of cartoons together before Jake dropped Lily off at school. Then Jake drove to the water plant. That morning, Lily looked up from her cereal bowl and said, "Dad, what's that noise?" Jake had not heard anything. He lowered his coffee mug and listened. It was a low hum, deep, steady, like a giant engine idling somewhere far above. Jake thought it might be a plane. He stood and walked to the kitchen window. The sky outside was pale blue and cloudless. A perfect October morning. Then the hum got louder, and louder, and louder, until it was not a hum anymore. It was a vibration. Jake could feel it in his chest, in his teeth, in the floor beneath his feet. The coffee in his mug rippled like a tiny ocean. The cereal in Lily's bowl shook. Lily looked at her bowl, then looked at Jake. "Dad, stay here," Jake said. He walked to the front door and opened it. He stepped outside onto the small porch and looked up. What he saw made his legs stop working. He grabbed the porch railing to keep himself standing. The sky was gone. Not dark. Not cloudy. Gone. Replaced. Where the pale blue morning sky had been, there was now something else, something vast and gray and structured, like the underside of an enormous machine. It stretched from horizon to horizon in every direction. Jake turned his head left, then right, then all the way around. There was no edge to it. It covered everything. It was close enough that he could see detail, enormous panels, dark rectangular openings that could have been windows or weapons or vents, and structures that jutted down from the underside like skyscrapers growing from a ceiling. His neighbor, Tom Briggs, was already standing in his own driveway, looking up. Tom was 60 years old, retired Army, built like a fire hydrant. He had a coffee mug in one hand. His mouth was open. Jake called across the yard, "Tom." Tom looked at him. Tom's face was the color of chalk. "Tom, what is that?" Tom said, very slowly and very quietly, "That is not one of ours, son." Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket, then buzzed again, then started buzzing constantly, one notification after another. He pulled it out. Emergency alerts were stacking up faster than he could read them. National emergency. All civilians shelter in place. Unidentified objects detected over all major metropolitan areas. Do not approach windows. Do not attempt to travel. Remain calm. Federal authorities are aware. Emergency broadcasts to follow. Jake read the word objects and almost laughed. That was not an object. An object was a rock, a coffee mug, a car. This thing above him was a world. It was a structure so large that it had replaced the sky. He had no word for what he was looking at. He went back inside. Lily had come to the doorway of the kitchen. She was looking at him. "Dad, what's happening?" Jake knelt down to her level. He put both hands on her small shoulders. He looked into her brown eyes, her mother's eyes. "I don't know yet, baby," he said. "But we're going to be okay. I promise." He did not know if that promise was true, but he made it. Because she was 7 years old, and she had already lost her mother. And she needed to hear it. He sat her on the couch and turned on the television. Every channel was the same. Emergency broadcasts, news anchors who looked pale and frightened, shaky camera footage from all over the world showing the same thing. Massive structures in the sky. Not just one. Not just over America. Over every continent. Over every ocean. All identical. All arrived at exactly the same moment, 7:43 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The news anchor on Channel 4, a woman named Sandra Lee, was speaking in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm and failing at it. What we are seeing, and we must be clear, this is unprecedented in all of human history, appears to be some form of coordinated global event. These structures, which have now been confirmed by NASA, NORAD, and space agencies in over 40 countries, appeared simultaneously at approximately 7:43 this morning. Their origin is unknown. Their altitude has been measured at between 1,200 and 1,500 meters above sea level. We are being told they appear to be artificial in construction.
She paused.
She touched her earpiece. I'm receiving new information. We're being told that the structures have now been confirmed to be, she paused again. She looked directly at the camera.
Her voice dropped.
We are being told these structures are not of human origin. Jake stared at the television. Lily said, "What does that mean, Dad?" Not of human origin. Jake said, "It means they didn't come from here, sweetheart." She thought about this. Then she said, "Like aliens?"
Jake said, "Yeah."
"Like aliens." She nodded slowly. She looked at the television screen. Then she looked at the ceiling, as if she could see through it, up through the roof, up through whatever was up there. She said, "Are they friendly?" Jake looked at the ceiling too.
"I hope so," he said.
He did not say what he was actually thinking.
He was thinking about the size of that thing.
About the fact that it had appeared in total silence, without any warning, without any radar detection until it was already there, already covering the entire sky, already positioned with perfect precision over every major population center on Earth. That was not the behavior of something that wanted to make friends. That was the behavior of something that had already won. The first message came 4 hours after the arrival. Jake and Lily were still sitting on the couch. Tom Briggs had come inside and was sitting in the armchair, drinking a beer, even though it was barely noon. Nobody had said anything for a long time. They were just watching the television. The emergency broadcast had been running continuously. There had been no new information for almost 2 hours. Just the same footage, the same pale anchors, the same repeating text on the bottom of the screen. Shelter in place. Await further instructions. Then, without warning, every television screen in the world, every phone, every computer, every digital billboard, every screen of any kind, went blank. For 3 seconds, there was nothing. Then a voice came. It was a deep voice, clear and precise, speaking perfect English. Then speaking again in French. Then Spanish. Then Mandarin. Then Arabic. Then Russian. Then Japanese. And so on, moving through every major language on Earth in sequence, each time speaking the same message, word for word. The English version said this: "People of Earth, you have been observed. You have been measured. You have been found insufficient. This planet and its resources now belong to the Varek Empire. You are not being asked for permission. You are being informed of a fact. The transition will be orderly. Resistance will not be tolerated. Within the next 72 hours, Varek administrative vessels will land at designated points on your surface. All human populations will relocate to designated zones. Cooperation will result in a functional existence. Defiance will result in reduction. You have 72 hours. This message ends." Then every screen went blank again. Then everything came back to normal. The news broadcast, the emergency alerts, everything resuming exactly where it had been. Lily said, "What's reduction mean?" Tom Briggs, who had been a soldier for 22 years and had heard a lot of bad things said in a lot of different ways, stared at his beer bottle and said quietly, "It means they'll kill us, sweetheart." Jake said, "Tom." Tom looked at him. His old soldier's eyes were not afraid. They were calculating. He had the look of a man who had been in tight spots before and was already starting to think about the way out. "She asked," Tom said. "She's smart enough to ask. She's smart enough to hear the answer." Lily said, "Can we fight them?" Jake and Tom looked at each other. Jake did not know the answer. Tom said, "I don't know yet, little lady. But that's a real good question. That's exactly the right question to be asking." By the end of the first day, the world had a name for them. The Varek. The name had come from the message, the Varek Empire. By evening, that name was everywhere. On every news broadcast, in every online discussion, whispered in every shelter and basement and living room where people had gathered to wait and watch and try to understand what was happening. What emerged in those first 24 hours, pieced together from 1,000 different sources, scientists, military analysts, leaked government documents, radio astronomers who had been tracking signals for years, was a picture of something enormous. The Varek Empire was old. Older than human civilization by a factor that was hard to put a number on. The signals that radio telescopes had been detecting and failing to decode for decades, those had been Varek. The anomalous readings from certain star systems that had puzzled astronomers, Varek infrastructure. They were not from one planet. They were a civilization that spanned hundreds of star systems across a significant portion of one arm of the Milky Way galaxy. They had been watching Earth for a long time. They had been watching and waiting and assessing. Apparently, they had decided that whatever the threshold for sufficient was, humanity had not reached it. They had come to collect. Jake learned all of this sitting at Tom's kitchen table, watching Tom's larger television, while Lily slept in Tom's spare bedroom. Tom had pulled out a road atlas, an actual paper road atlas, because Tom Briggs did not fully trust anything that ran on electricity, and had spread it on the table. They said 72 hours, Tom said. He had not slept. His eyes were red, but his hands were steady. That's 3 days. In 3 days, they start landing administrative vessels, whatever that means. They said designated points. The question is, where? Jake said, Tom, what are we supposed to do? We're 2 guys in Millbrook, Ohio. I fix pipes. You're retired. I'm retired Army, son. That's different from retired. Tom tapped the atlas. You know what I keep thinking about? I keep thinking about the message. They gave us 72 hours.
Why?
To prepare?
No. Think about it.
They already had us. They showed up everywhere, at the same time, without any warning. If they wanted to just take over, they could have started that process the second they arrived. They didn't need to send a message. They didn't need to give us time. They chose to. Tom sat back. Why does a predator give you a warning before it attacks? Jake thought. To make you run in a direction.
Tom pointed at him.
That's right. They want us organized. They want us moving to specific zones. Because that's easier to manage. 72 hours isn't kindness. It's logistics. They're not giving us time out of mercy. They're giving us time to make their job easier. Jake stared at the atlas. He looked at the state of Ohio. He looked at all the roads connecting all the towns. What are we going to do? He said again, but this time it was a real question, not a defeated one. Tom said, we're going to go underground. Literally. By the second morning, the governments of Earth had not gone quietly. That was one thing Jake had been wrong about. He had assumed, and he thought most people had assumed, that the political and military powers of the world would either immediately surrender or be immediately destroyed. The scale of the Varek presence was so overwhelming that resistance seemed like a word from a different reality. But humans, it turned out, did not stop being humans just because something impossible was happening. The United States military had gone dark within 6 hours of the arrival, not destroyed, but communications dark, shifting to protocols designed for exactly this kind of scenario, protocols that had been drafted in small rooms by serious people who had spent their careers thinking about the unthinkable. China's military had done the same.
Russia.
Every nuclear power on Earth had their arsenals on some form of alert, though nobody was firing anything yet because nobody knew if conventional or nuclear weapons would do anything at all against structures that size. NATO had convened an emergency session. The United Nations Security Council was meeting continuously in an undisclosed location because the UN headquarters in New York was directly beneath one of the Varek structures, and nobody wanted to have that meeting with that thing hanging over their heads. Jake got most of this from Tom, who had started picking up shortwave radio signals. Tom had a shortwave radio in his basement. Of course he did. And he had been listening since the first night. Not everything he heard was reliable. Some of it was clearly panic. Some of it was clearly disinformation. But some of it was military communication or what sounded like it, and from those fragments Tom was assembling a picture. Our guys haven't surrendered, Tom said on the morning of day 2. That's the thing. They haven't fired anything either. Smart, because we don't know what those ships can take. But they're moving. They're repositioning. They went underground, and they're talking to each other, and they're thinking. Jake said, "Thinking about what?" "About the same thing any good soldier thinks about when they're outgunned," Tom said. "About what the other guy doesn't know. About what the other guy hasn't thought of. About the gap." Jake looked at him. "What gap?" Tom smiled for the first time in 2 days. It was a grim smile. "That's what we need to find." The Varek made their second communication on hour 36. This time it was not a broadcast to every screen on Earth. This time it was a targeted communication, sent through official government channels, in the form of a data package that decoded itself when received. It went to every head of state simultaneously. The content of that communication leaked within hours, as everything does. What it contained was a map. The map showed Earth divided into 12 zones. Each zone was designated with a number. In each zone, there was a single point marked with a circle. Those were the designated landing sites, where the administrative vessels would touch down in 36 hours. The map also contained a list. The list was of technologies. Specifically, the list was of human technologies that the Varek had decided were not compatible with the transition. The list was long. It included virtually every weapon system that existed on Earth, conventional, nuclear, biological, and several categories that were described in technical language that human scientists who saw the list did not immediately recognize. At the bottom of the list was a note. The note said, "The technologies listed above will be deactivated at T-12 hours. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy notice." In other words, the Varek were going to shut off all human weapons 12 hours before landing. Tom read the leaked map and list on his laptop, then sat very still for a long time. Then he said, "They're going to kill everything that runs on standard electromagnetic systems." That list, every item on that list operates on established electromagnetic principles. They're going to put out some kind of pulse or field that renders all of it inert. Jake said, "Everything. Everything on that list, which is basically every weapon we have." Jake said, "Is there anything that doesn't run on that?" Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said very slowly, There might be something. And if there is, they might not know about it." He stood up. He went to his phone and made a call. Jake didn't know who Tom called. Tom went into the other room and was in there for a long time, speaking quietly. When he came back, his expression had changed. It was still serious, still careful, but something had shifted in it. A small, hard brightness that Jake recognized from the way Tom had described his time in service. It was the look of a man who had found a thread in the darkness and was starting to pull it. "There's a man I served with," Tom said. "Name is General Marcus Webb. He's been running a program, small, off-book, not on any digital record, for about 8 years. Started it after a different kind of threat scenario. The program explores non-standard systems, things that work on principles the Varek list doesn't cover." Jake said, "You think they miss something?" "I think," Tom said carefully, "that they have been watching us for a long time, but watching from very far away. And I think there are things we do down here in the dirt and the dark, in the small rooms that don't make it into textbooks or news articles or signals that travel into space. I think there are things they might not know about. Because you cannot fully understand a civilization by observing it from orbit. You have to live in it." He paused. "And they have never lived here." Tom Briggs had a truck. An old one, 1987 Ford F-150, diesel engine, no computers, no electronics beyond a basic ignition, and a cassette deck that only played one tape, which was a Johnny Cash album. Tom had kept it running as a hobby, or so he had always said. Now Jake understood it had been more than a hobby. "If they pulse out anything electromagnetic," Tom said, loading supplies into the truck bed, "this old girl won't notice. No electronic fuel injection. No computer management system. No GPS. Nothing digital. Just metal and diesel and physics." Jake helped him load. They were taking food, water, the shortwave radio, tools, and a duffel bag that Tom packed from a locked cabinet in his basement that Jake had never seen him open before. Jake did not ask what was in the duffel bag. He had a feeling he would find out. Lily was strapped into the back seat with a blanket and a backpack containing her most important things, a stuffed rabbit named Captain Ears, 3 books, a photograph of her mother, and a zip-top bag of trail mix. She watched Jake and Tom work with large, serious eyes and did not complain or cry. She said, "Where are we going, Dad?" "To meet someone," Jake said. "A friend of Tom's." "Is this person going to help?" Jake looked at Tom. Tom was tying down the load in the truck bed. His old hands moved quickly and with certainty. "Yes," Jake said. "I think so." They left Millbrook at 4 in the morning on the second day. The streets were empty. Some houses were lit, curtains drawn, people inside waiting. A few houses were dark. A few cars were on the road, moving in various directions, some people heading to family, some following the government's shelter-in-place instruction, and then giving up on it, some just moving because movement felt better than stillness. The Varek structure was still above them, always above them. The town was in its shadow constantly now, not dark, because the thing above reflected light from its underside, a dim and colorless illumination that felt wrong, that made familiar things look strange, that made Jake's eyes keep wanting to adjust even though there was nothing to adjust to. He sat in the passenger seat of Tom's truck and watched the town disappear behind them and felt, for the first time since this started, something other than helplessness. It was small, whatever it was. Fragile. But it was there. Tom drove south on state routes, avoiding the highways where traffic was unpredictable and where he said authority figures were likely to be directing people toward the designated zones. The truck's engine made a steady, mechanical sound that was reassuring, honest and simple, and nothing like the low vibration that came from above. Tom had a paper map on the seat between them. After about an hour of driving, Lily fell asleep against the window. Jake watched the dark fields pass and said quietly, "Tell me about Marcus Webb." Tom said, "Marcus is the kind of man who believes in preparing for things people tell him are impossible." He started believing that after the Cold War, when he was in a room where serious people were presenting scenarios they called impossible, and then one by one those scenarios started happening. He learned to stop calling things impossible. What's his program? He won't have a name for it. That's how he works. Official programs have names. Names are on documents. Documents can be found. Marcus does everything without a name. What does it do? Tom was quiet for a moment, watching the road. "You know about sonic research?" he said. "Acoustic physics? The study of sound at frequencies human ears can't detect." Jake said, "Infrasound, among other things." Marcus has been working with a team, physicists, engineers, people from disciplines you wouldn't expect, on what he calls resonance-based systems. The core idea is simple. Every physical structure has a resonant frequency, a frequency at which its own physical composition begins to fail. You know the story about the opera singer breaking a glass with her voice? Yeah. Same principle, but not for glass. For much, much bigger things. Tom looked straight ahead. If you can find the resonant frequency of a structure, any structure, and you can generate a sound at that frequency with enough energy, the structure will tear itself apart. From the inside, without any impact, without any conventional weapon. Jake stared at him. "That's not, Tom. These things above us are enormous. The scale." "I know. To generate enough energy to..." "I know. But think about it this way. It doesn't have to be an acoustic wave in the traditional sense. It can be a wave transmitted through any medium.
Air, ground,
Water. It can be transmitted over any distance if you understand the propagation." Tom tapped the wheel. "Marcus's team found something. Found it about 3 years ago, and have been testing it since. Small scale. Very small scale. They could make a car shake itself to pieces at a quarter mile. But they built the theory. The math says it scales. The math says if you can find the right frequency and generate it with a large enough source, the scale doesn't matter."
Jake absorbed this.
"The Varek," he said slowly, "sent a list of technologies they're going to deactivate. That list is all electromagnetic systems." "That's right. Sound isn't electromagnetic. Sound," Tom said, "is mechanical vibration. It moves through matter. It doesn't need an electromagnetic field. It doesn't trigger an electromagnetic detector. As far as the Varek's deactivation system is concerned, as far as any radar or scanner looking for weapon signatures is concerned," he paused. Sound is just noise. Jake said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Huh, do they not know about this? If they've been watching us. Because Marcus's program doesn't exist on any network. No digital communication. No satellite uplink. Nothing that travels through the air, where a ship in orbit can intercept it. He built the whole thing with analog systems, paper records, in-person communication only. The team is small, 12 people. All former military. All vetted personally by Marcus. None of them with any digital connection to the program." Tom glanced at him. "The Varek have been monitoring our electromagnetic spectrum for decades. Our internet, our satellites, our digital communication. They think they know everything we're doing. They don't know about the things we're doing in the dark." Jake thought of his daughter asleep in the back seat. He thought of Dana. He thought of Millbrook and the water plant and the routine of 11 years. He said, "Where are we going?" Tom said, "Southern Kentucky. An old coal mine. About 400 feet underground." Jake said, "Is it enough?" Tom said, "It's a start." They arrived at the mine entrance just after noon on the second day. It was not marked. The entrance was behind a farm property, through a gate that required a key Tom had on his keychain, down a gravel road that was invisible from any aerial view because of the tree cover overhead. General Marcus Webb was already there. He was a large man, not tall, but broad, with a thick gray mustache and hands that looked like they had been doing physical work for 70 years. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots. He greeted Tom with a handshake that turned into a brief embrace, the way old soldiers do. He looked at Jake. He looked at Lily. "You brought civilians," he said to Tom. "I brought family," Tom said. Webb looked at Jake steadily for a moment. "Can you follow instructions without asking why?" Jake said, "I can follow instructions. I'll probably ask why anyway." Webb almost smiled. "Good. I'd rather have someone who thinks than someone who obeys." He looked at Lily. "And the girl stays with us no matter what. She doesn't go anywhere alone." Lily looked at him, with her large brown eyes. "Are you the person who's going to fight the aliens?" Webb crouched down to her level. He did it slowly, his old knees working against him, and looked at her seriously. "We're going to try, young lady." "Good," Lily said. Because they were rude. The mine was 4 levels deep. The first level was storage, food, water, fuel, and equipment. The second level was living quarters, rough but functional, with cots and a kitchen area and a bathroom that ran on a hand-pumped well. The third level was the lab. The lab was not what Jake had expected. He had expected something high-tech, glowing screens, advanced equipment, the kind of space you see in science fiction movies. What he found instead was something that looked almost primitive. Workbenches covered in mechanical equipment, oscilloscopes with analog dials, massive audio transducers, speakers essentially, but not like any speakers Jake had ever seen. These were the size of industrial furnaces, built from steel and copper and materials he did not recognize, mounted on thick rubber isolation pads. The walls of the lab were covered in paper. Actual paper. Equations, diagrams, handwritten notes in multiple colors of ink. The paper was yellowed in places, covered in coffee stains, marked with corrections and additions. A woman in her 50s was sitting at a workbench when they entered. She had sharp eyes and short gray hair, and she looked up from what she was doing with the expression of someone who had been expecting them and was already slightly impatient. "Dr. Rachel Okonkwo," Webb said. "She runs the science end." Dr. Okonkwo said, "You're late. And you brought a child." Tom said, "Rachel, meet Jake Carter. And his daughter Lily." Dr. Okonkwo looked at Lily. She said, "Hello." Lily said, "Hello. What are all those big speakers for?" Dr. Okonkwo looked at the massive transducers. Then she looked at Lily. "Have you ever been near a big speaker at a concert?" she said. "Close enough that you could feel the music in your chest." Lily said, "Yeah. Mom took me to see a country singer. The bass made my ribs shake." Dr. Okonkwo said, "That's because sound is pressure. It's physical force. Those speakers," she nodded at the transducers, "make a kind of sound. You can't hear it, but you can feel it. And it is much, much stronger than anything at a concert." Lily thought about this. Strong enough to shake an alien spaceship? Dr. Okonkwo looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "That is exactly what we are trying to find out." The full team was 11 people. Jake made 12 if you counted him. Webb counted him, said he needed people who could work equipment and that Jake's background in mechanical systems at the water plant was relevant. They gathered in the lab that afternoon. Webb stood at the front. He did not give a speech. He was not a speech-giving kind of man. He laid out facts. The structures above us are large. We don't know exactly what they're made of. We have some data from radar imaging done before they arrived, anomalous returns from objects at the edge of our solar system over the past 2 years. The radar signature gave us a partial material profile. Rachel's team has been running that data. Dr. Okonkwo took over. She moved to a large paper diagram on the wall, a cross-section of what appeared to be the underside of one of the Varek structures, reconstructed from imaging data. Based on the radar return signatures, the outer hull of these vessels is composed of what appears to be a crystalline alloy. The crystalline structure is significant because crystalline materials have very defined resonant frequencies, much more predictable than amorphous materials. If the radar data is accurate, and I believe it is, then we should be able to calculate the primary resonant frequency of this hull material. A man at the back, young, early 30s, with thick glasses and a nervous energy, raised his hand slightly. His name was Danny Park, and he was the team's acoustic physicist. "We have a preliminary calculation," Danny said. "We've been running the numbers since we first got the radar data 18 months ago. We have a target frequency." The room was very quiet. Webb said, "Say it." Danny said, 17.34 Hz. Jake knew about infrasound. He had read about it years ago, the frequencies below human hearing. Some research suggested that infrasound in the range of 18 to 19 Hz could cause discomfort in humans, a sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, visual disturbances. It had been proposed as an explanation for some ghost sightings. 17.34 Hz was just below that range. If the hull of the Varek ships was crystalline, and if 17.34 Hz was its resonant frequency, then broadcasting that frequency with sufficient energy would cause the hull to vibrate at its own natural frequency. The vibration would build on itself, amplified by the crystal structure's own physics. And, eventually, it'll shake itself apart, Jake said. Danny looked at him. "In theory." Webb said, "In theory, which is the part we need to resolve. Because we have one chance at this. The moment we fire up the transducers, there will be an energy signature. We don't know if they can detect acoustic energy. We don't know if they have a countermeasure. We don't know if they can respond fast enough. All we know is that we have one shot, and we need to make it count." Tom said, "What do we have?" Dr. Okonkwo said, 3 transducer arrays. Each array is capable of generating approximately 40 gigawatts of acoustic energy at the target frequency. The arrays are positioned at 3 different sites, this mine, a second site in eastern Tennessee, and a third site in western Virginia. The sites are geographically placed to create a constructive interference pattern. If all 3 fire simultaneously, the combined energy focused on any given point will be approximately 140 gigawatts. Jake did the math in his head. "Is that enough?" Danny said quietly. "Our models say yes. For a single vessel, the crystalline hull, under that level of resonant bombardment, should reach critical vibration within approximately 14 minutes. The room was quiet again. 14 minutes. Webb said, "The problem is the number of vessels. There are 12 structures positioned over Earth. We have 3 arrays. We can't hit all of them simultaneously." He let that sit. Then Dr. Okonkwo said, "Unless we use Earth." This was the part that Jake had to hear twice to believe. The Earth, Dr. Okonkwo explained, is not a passive object. It is a dynamic system, its crust, mantle, and core all in constant motion, all conducting vibration. Seismic waves travel through the Earth from earthquake events and can be detected on the opposite side of the planet. The Earth itself is, in acoustic terms, a conductor. If the 3 transducer arrays fired into the ground, not into the air, If they broadcast the target frequency downward, into the bedrock, the vibration would travel through the Earth's crust as a seismic wave. A carefully calculated seismic wave, shaped by the interference of the three arrays, could propagate outward through the crust and reach every point on the Earth's surface simultaneously. Every point, including the points directly beneath all 12 Varek structures. The crystalline hull material, Dr. Okonkwo said, is in contact with Earth's atmosphere. The atmospheric pressure changes caused by ground-based acoustic propagation would couple into the hull. The coupling would be less efficient than direct transmission, but if the ground wave is strong enough. 140 gigawatts isn't enough for air coupling, Danny said. We calculated that. But there's a second factor. The Varek structures are enormous. Their mass creates a gravitational coupling with the Earth's surface. They're not floating freely. They're gravitationally bound to the planet at their current altitude. The gravity coupling creates a mechanical connection. The seismic wave travels up through the gravitational field. Jake said, "You're saying the Earth's gravity becomes the transmission medium?" Danny blinked.
Yes.
That's exactly it. The gravitational coupling means the vibration doesn't have to travel through air. It travels through the gravitational field itself, directly into the hull. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did you just figure that out?" Danny looked slightly embarrassed. "I figured out the gravity coupling part about 2 weeks ago. We've been testing the calculations since then. It changes the efficiency numbers significantly." Webb said, "How significantly?" Danny said, "At full power, ground transmission, gravity-coupled, constructive interference across all three arrays, we estimate the effective energy reaching each Varek hull is approximately 400 gigawatts." The number was almost too large to process. Webb said, "Is that enough to affect all 12 simultaneously?"
Danny said, "Yes."
In our models, each hull reaches critical resonance within 14 minutes of sustained transmission. 14 minutes again. Jake thought about the message the Varek had sent. The Empire was not asked for permission. You are being informed of a fact. He thought about that word. Empire. Something that spanned hundreds of star systems. Something that had been alive longer than human civilization. Something that had come to Earth to collect it like a piece of property. Something that had spent a very long time watching Earth from very far away, and had never once thought to wonder what it might feel like from the inside. He said, "When do we do this?" Webb said, "The Varek announced they will deactivate all electromagnetic systems at T-12. That's in about 16 hours. At T-12, they'll be running their deactivation sweep. Every conventional weapon system on Earth will go dark. Every radar, every gun system with electronic targeting, every missile, every drone. In that window, they will think they have us completely disarmed." He paused. "That's when we fire." They worked through the night. Jake's job was mechanical, maintaining the transducer array, checking the connections, monitoring the power systems. The array was running on a generator system that Tom and another team member named Carl Ruiz had built over the past 2 years. The generators were diesel, simple, robust, not electromagnetic dependent. They would survive whatever pulse or field the Varek used to deactivate electronics. Jake worked steadily, checking each connection 3 times. His hands knew mechanical work. The water plant had given him 11 years of understanding systems, how power moved through infrastructure, how failure propagated, how to find the weak point before it became a catastrophic one. Lily was in the living quarters on level 2, supposedly sleeping. Jake had checked on her twice. The first time she was reading one of her books by flashlight. The second time she was asleep with Captain Ears tucked under her arm and the photograph of Dana sitting on the cot beside her, face up. Jake stood in the doorway of the small room for a long moment. He thought about Dana. She had been a schoolteacher. 4th grade. She had been the kind of person who could walk into a room full of chaos and in about 30 seconds have everyone calm and focused, not by being loud or authoritative, just by being so completely steady that the chaos seemed embarrassed around her. Lily had inherited that from her. Dana had been sick for 14 months before she died. During those 14 months, she had not once told Jake what to do or how to feel or what decisions to make. She had just looked at him sometimes, with those brown eyes that Lily had inherited, and said, "I trust you, Jake." He had not always been sure he deserved that trust. He went back to work. At 3 a.m., Tom found Jake in the lab. Tom sat on a stool across from the workbench where Jake was checking a coupling bolt on the transducer housing. For a while Tom just sat there, which was unusual. Tom was not a sitting and doing nothing kind of person. Jake said, "What?" Tom said, "Rachel ran the numbers on the coupling efficiency again tonight." Jake said, "And?" Tom said, "They're good. The gravity coupling, it works. The math is solid. Danny's been checking it for 16 hours straight, and it holds up." But, Tom said, "But math isn't reality. The arrays have never been fired at full power. The ground transmission mode has never been tested beyond small-scale models. What works in theory sometimes doesn't work in practice. You know that as well as I do." Jake set down his wrench. "So there's a chance it doesn't work." "There's a chance. Smaller than it was before Danny figured out the gravity coupling, but a chance." Jake said, "And if it doesn't work?" Tom said, "Then we've given away the only thing we had and they know we tried, and we're in a worse position than before." They sat with that for a moment. Jake said, "Is there a chance it blows up?" "The arrays. If they overheat or the coupling fails." Tom said, "We're 400 feet underground. The shielding around the arrays is substantial. Rachel designed for failure modes. A coupling failure would be bad for the equipment. Probably not for us." Jake said, "Probably."
Tom said, "Yeah,
"Probably."
Jake thought about this.
He thought about Lily asleep upstairs with Captain Ears and Dana's photograph. He thought about what the Varek had said, designated zones, functional existence. He thought about what Tom had said that zone meant, a managed population. Controlled.
Contained.
Alive, technically the way a farm animal is alive. He picked up his wrench. He said, "We do it." Tom said, "I know." Jake said, "I just wanted to say it out loud." Tom said, "Sometimes that matters." By 4 a.m., the other two sites had checked in. Both were ready. The Tennessee site was run by a woman named Colonel Patricia Hayes, who Webb had served with for 15 years. The Virginia site was run by a man named Dr. James Okery, who had been part of the original acoustic research project and had spent the last 2 years believing in the math even when nobody else was listening. All three sites communicated by a landline telephone system, actual copper wire telephone, buried deep, analog, no digital signals, no satellite uplink, nothing the Varek could intercept or detect or shut down. It was the most old-fashioned communications infrastructure on the planet, and for this moment, it was the most valuable. Webb had a telephone handset, the old kind with a coiled cord. He spoke briefly with Hayes and Okery. He confirmed readiness. He confirmed the firing window, T-12, the moment the Varek began their deactivation sweep, when every sophisticated weapon system on Earth was going dark. That window opened in approximately 12 hours. 6 hours before the window opened, something unexpected happened. Jake was eating breakfast in the Level 2 kitchen, scrambled eggs that Carl Ruiz had made on a camp stove, strong black coffee, when the shortwave radio Tom kept running continuously picked up a signal. The signal was in English. It was clear and steady. It said, "This is General Alan Foster, United States Strategic Command, broadcasting on emergency shortwave frequency 14.7 MHz. To any listening units, we have received information about an operation, location unconfirmed, identity unconfirmed, involving non-standard acoustic systems. If you are the people running that operation, listen carefully. We know about the deactivation window. We know what you're planning. We cannot communicate our support through any official channel because they will be monitoring. But we want you to know, when you fire, you will not be alone. We have contingencies in place. We have been preparing. When that window opens, every available resource that survived the deactivation, everything we kept off the grid, everything we built analog, it all goes active. You fire your system, we create maximum distraction. We will make as much noise as we can so they're looking at us instead of at you. Do your job. We'll do ours. Foster out." The radio went quiet. The kitchen was completely silent. Jake looked at Tom. Tom looked at Jake. Webb, who had been standing in the doorway, said quietly, "We're not as alone as I thought." Tom said, "Who else do you think got the memo?" Webb said, "If Foster knows, then his counterparts know. Every military that went dark in the first 48 hours, they've been communicating. They've been preparing. Off-grid, analog, old methods. The same methods we've been using." Jake said, "The Varek think they're watching everything. They've been monitoring our signals for decades. They know our technology. They built their deactivation list based on what they know."
He paused.
"They don't know about the things we stopped using. The old things. The things we kept in basements and attics and mines." Danny Park, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway, said quietly, "They measured our progress. But they didn't measure our memory." The deactivation sweep began at exactly T-12. Jake felt it more than he heard it. A shift in the air. A slight change in the vibration above them. The constant background hum of the Varek structures changing pitch slightly, like a key change in a piece of music you had been hearing so long you'd stopped noticing it. Then Tom's shortwave radio went quiet. Not off. Not dead. Just quiet. The signals that had been running continuously, military frequencies, civilian broadcasts, the scattered voices of a world trying to function in crisis, all cut out at once, like someone had put a hand over every speaker on the planet.
Tom looked at the radio.
He turned the dial slowly across the frequency range. Nothing. Nothing. Nothing.
"There it is," Tom said.
The Varek deactivation field was active. Everything electromagnetic, every weapon system, every targeting computer, every radar array, every digital communication system. All of it dead. Every conventional weapon on Earth had just become a piece of expensive, inert metal. Jake felt something cold move through him. Not fear, or not just fear. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of something enormous and irreversible, of being at a point where the decision had already been made, and all that remained was the action. He looked at Tom. Tom said, "It's time." Webb was already on the copper wire telephone when they reached the lab. He was speaking briefly with Hayes in Tennessee and Okery in Virginia, checking final readiness, confirming the firing sequence. The sequence had to be simultaneous, all three arrays firing at the exact same moment, because the constructive interference pattern that focused the energy globally required precise synchronization. They had synchronized their timekeeping to mechanical clocks, analog wound by hand, in the 2 weeks before this moment. When Webb put down the telephone, he looked at the team. He said, "When I give the word, we fire. We sustain for 14 minutes. We maintain the firing through any equipment warning, any anomaly, any distraction, unless I personally give the order to stop. Is that understood?" Everyone said yes. He looked at Danny Park. "Give me the countdown." Danny was watching a mechanical clock on the wall. He said, 60 seconds to synchronization point. Jake moved to his position at the power monitoring station, a bank of analog gauges and manual switches, no digital components anywhere. His job was to watch the power output across the 3 transducer units in the array and to manage any power fluctuation manually. He had practiced this for 4 hours the previous night. He put his hands on the manual control levers. He thought of Dana. "I trust you." He thought of Lily upstairs. She was awake. He knew she was awake. She was too alert to sleep through the sound of adults moving with purpose. He hoped she was okay. He hoped Captain Ears was doing his job. Danny said, 30 seconds. The lab was very quiet. The team was at their stations. Some were holding their breath. Some were staring at gauges and dials with the focused intensity of people who understood exactly what was about to happen. Webb was standing very still at the center of the room. His hands were at his sides. His expression was unreadable. Danny said, 10,
9, 8,
7,
6, 5, 4,
3,
2, 1.
Synchronization point now. Webb said, "Fire." The sound was impossible. That was Jake's first thought, that the sound the transducers made was not a sound at all. It was below sound. It was beneath hearing. But it was not nothing. He could feel it in every cell of his body. A deep, rhythmic, powerful vibration at 17.34 Hz, the frequency below human perception, the frequency that matched the crystalline lattice structure of a whole material from another star system. The gauges at Jake's station lit up. All three transducers were firing at full power. The combined output reading was climbing 90 gigawatts, 110, 130, then settling at 142 gigawatts as the arrays reached full operational output. The floor of the mine vibrated. Not shaking, not dangerously. A steady, deep tremor, like standing near a very large engine. The vibration moved through the rock, through the walls, through Jake's boots and up through his legs and into his chest. It was the 17.34 hertz signal, broadcasting not into the air, but directly into the rock, into the bedrock of the Earth, beginning its journey outward through the planet's crust. Toward the structures above. Danny was watching his instruments with an expression of intense concentration. He said, "Arrays synchronized. Ground coupling is good.
Good.
Propagation is initiated." Webb said, "Confirmed from Tennessee and Virginia?" Rachel Okonkwo, who was managing the communication with the other sites, said, "Confirmed from Tennessee. Confirmed from Virginia. All three arrays are firing and synchronized." Webb nodded. He said, 14 minutes. Jake watched his gauges. The power readings were steady. He made small adjustments. A transducer 1 was drawing slightly high. He reduced its input by 3%, balanced it. Transducer 2 was running perfectly. Transducer 3 had a slight vibration anomaly in the housing. He had noted that during pre-fire checks, and he managed it now, adjusting the isolation mounting slightly to prevent resonance buildup in the housing itself. His hands were completely steady. He thought, 11 years of checking pipes and running tests and filling out paperwork. 11 years of small mechanical decisions in a small mechanical job. Every one of those years was in his hands right now. 3 minutes in. 5 minutes in. 7 minutes in. Danny said, "The propagation pattern is holding. The constructive interference is, I need to say this carefully, it's working. The theoretical model is matching the propagation data. The wave is reaching surface points globally." The lab was silent except for the deep, subaudible vibration of the arrays. Webb said, "How are the other sites holding?" Rachel said, "Tennessee is good. Virginia is reporting a power fluctuation. Okery says he's managing it." Webb said, "Keep the line open." Jake adjusted transducer 1 again. It was climbing. He brought it back down. Steady. Steady. 9 minutes in. Then Danny said, very quietly, "Something is happening." Jake could not see the sky from 400 feet underground, but he would learn later what was happening above. At 9 minutes into the firing, the Varek structure positioned over the North American continent began to change. The enormous, flat, gray underside, which had been completely still and silent since its arrival, began to move. Not moving away. Not moving closer. Moving wrong. Small shutters, visible from the surface even through the dim reflected light. Panels shifting against each other. Structural members vibrating in ways that looked painful, if a structure can look in pain. There were people watching from every town beneath it. They were standing in their yards, on their rooftops, looking up through the strange alien light at the thing that had replaced their sky. They did not know what was happening. They had been told to wait. They had been waiting. The first sign they saw was a sound. Not the 17.34 hertz signal that was below hearing, but the structural response to it was not. As the crystalline hull of the Varek vessel began to vibrate at its resonant frequency, secondary harmonics were generated. Overtones in the audible range. They emerged slowly, a low moan that grew louder, a sound like something enormous and wrong, a sound like a mountain learning that it was made of glass. People in Millbrook, Ohio looked up and heard that sound, and some of them started walking away from it, and some of them stood absolutely still. In the Varek vessel itself, 4,000 meters above, things were worse. The Varek crew of the North American vessel numbered approximately 8,000 individuals. The vessel was the size of a small city. Its systems were advanced beyond any comparison to human technology. Its weapons alone were capable of reducing the surface of a planet to bedrock. But its hull was crystalline. And at 17.34 hertz, that crystal was beginning to hear a song it had never been designed to hear. The Varek monitoring systems detected the anomaly at the 9-minute mark. They measured the vibration in the hull. They ran it through their analysis systems. The analysis systems returned a result that their operators had never seen before in any operational record. Structural resonance failure. Imminent. The Varek had a word for this. In their language, it translated roughly to the deep sound, a theoretical failure mode that was taught in their engineering courses as a historical curiosity. It had been calculated long ago that crystalline hull material could theoretically be disrupted by precise resonant frequencies. The calculation had noted this in a technical footnote. The operational assessment had concluded that generating such frequencies with sufficient power was beyond the capability of any civilization at humanity's technological level. The assessment had not accounted for three things. It had not accounted for analog systems that left no electromagnetic signature. It had not accounted for the Earth itself as a transmission medium. And it had not accounted for gravity coupling, a principle that Danny Park had worked out on paper 2 weeks ago in a mine in Kentucky that no Varek scanner had ever seen. The Varek vessel commander ordered emergency countermeasures. He ordered the hull vibration dampeners activated. The dampeners were electromagnetic. They worked by generating a counter field that resisted structural oscillation. They were very good systems, very sophisticated. They had just been disabled by the Varek's own deactivation sweep. The commander stared at his status board and understood, in the last few minutes of his command, that his empire had made a mistake. Back in the mine, Jake did not know any of this. He was watching gauges and managing power flows and making small adjustments and trying not to think about anything except the numbers in front of him. 11 minutes. 12 minutes. Danny said, "I'm getting ground return data. The propagation it's doing something. The reflections coming back from the coupling points." He stopped. He looked at his instruments. He said, "It's working." Nobody reacted yet. It was too soon to react. 13 minutes. Rachel said, "Virginia is reporting full recovery from the power fluctuation. All 3 sites at full output." 13 minutes and 30 seconds. The floor vibration changed. Not the 17.34 Hz baseline that was steady. Something else. A different vibration, lower and uneven, coming from above. Coming through the rock, but not from the arrays. From outside. From the world above. Jake felt it in his palms against the control levers. A new tremor. Irregular. Like nothing he had felt before. Danny said, That's structural failure propagation. That's the feedback from." He stopped himself. His voice was shaking slightly. "That's coming from above." 14 minutes. Webb said, "Hold." Nobody moved. 14 minutes and 10 seconds. The new vibration intensified. The irregular tremor grew. And then, from very far above, through 400 feet of solid rock, Jake felt, or thought he felt, a sound that was more than sound. A resonance. A frequency that wasn't 17.34 Hz and wasn't the arrays. Something that was the Earth's crust responding to something enormous and violent happening on its surface. 14 minutes and 22 seconds. And then that vibration, the irregular, outside vibration, stopped.
Suddenly. Completely.
Like a switch being thrown. The lab was completely still. The arrays were still running. The floor still trembled at 17.34 Hz. But the new vibration, the feedback from above, was gone. Danny Park was staring at his instruments. He was not moving. His face was completely white. Webb said, "Danny." Danny said, very quietly, "The crystalline hull resonance signature, it's gone. From every propagation reflection point. All 12.
He paused.
He swallowed. "They're gone." Nobody spoke. Webb said, "Confirm." Danny said, "I'm confirming. The resonance signature that corresponds to the whole material, it's absent from every reflection return. All 12. Simultaneously." He looked up from his instruments.
He looked at Webb.
He said, "All 12 vessels." 14 minutes. They did not immediately cheer. They did not celebrate. They stood in the lab, and they were very quiet. It did not feel like victory yet. It felt like the moment after a very loud sound stops, when you are not yet sure if the silence is peaceful or if it means something worse is coming. Webb was on the telephone. He was talking to Hayes in Tennessee, who was saying something Jake couldn't hear from across the room. Then he was talking to Okery in Virginia. He listened more than he spoke. When he put the phone down, he turned to the room. He said, "Cut the arrays." Jake cut the arrays. The deep subaudible vibration of the transducer stopped. The floor steadied. The silence was complete, the heavy, pressured silence of a space deep underground, for 100 feet of rock above them. A world that might be very different above. Webb said, "Hayes is reporting visual confirmation from surface observers. All 3 observer teams at the Tennessee site that have line of sight to the Nashville coverage area, they're confirming the structure is down." A person at the back, a woman named Lieutenant Sarah Moss, who had been quiet throughout, said, "Down as in?" Webb said, "Down as in not there anymore." He paused. "The structure above the Nashville observation area is gone. Their observers are reporting open sky." Open sky. 2 words that Jake had not fully understood the value of until this moment. He had taken sky for granted for 34 years. Blue sky in the morning.
Clouds.
The sun. The ordinary miracle of a clear day. Open sky. He sat down on a stool at his workbench. His legs had decided they needed a break. He put his hands flat on the workbench surface and breathed. Tom was watching him. Tom said, "You okay?" Jake said, "Yeah." Tom said, "You did good." Jake said, "We all did."
Tom said, "Yeah."
"But you specifically." He tapped his chest, over his heart. "In here. You held." Jake did not know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. Then Lily appeared at the lab door. She was still in her pajamas. Her hair was tangled, and she had captain ears in a tight grip. She looked at Jake, then at the room, then at Tom, then back at Jake. She said, "Is it over?" Jake said, "I think so. I think so, baby." She crossed the room and climbed into his lap, even though she was 7 and had been telling him for several months that she was too big for that. He put his arms around her, and she put her head against his chest, and neither of them said anything for a while. Webb was watching the wall, not any particular part of it, just the wall. His expression was that of a man trying to fully understand something that kept being too large to fit in a single thought. He said, to the room, to nobody in particular, 14 minutes. They came to the surface at dawn. The mine entrance faced east. When Jake walked out of the mine entrance into the morning air, the first thing he saw was the sky.
It was just sky.
Pink and pale blue, the colors of early morning, clouds in the west catching the first light. The ordinary, unremarkable, irreplaceable sky. He stopped walking and just looked at it. Lily came out behind him and stood next to him and looked too. She said, "It's just sky." Jake said, "Yeah." She said, "That's better."
He said, "Yeah."
"That's definitely better." The air smelled of October, fallen leaves, a bit of wood smoke from somewhere, the cold, clean smell of morning. Jake breathed it in and held it. Tom came out and stood beside him. Tom looked up at the sky for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "My first overseas deployment, I was 19 years old. When I came home, not from that one, the first one, when I came home from the second one, I stood in my parents' backyard in the middle of the night and just looked at the sky for about an hour. The stars. Just the stars. You never know what ordinary things cost until someone tries to take them from you." He put his hand briefly on Jake's shoulder. Then he went to check on the truck. The shortwave radio came back. Not everything electromagnetic was immediately restored. The Varek's deactivation field had been tied to their systems, and with those systems destroyed, the field had presumably collapsed along with everything else. But the collapse was not instantaneous. It took several hours. By mid-morning, Tom's shortwave radio started picking up signals again. Fragments at first, then more. Voices from around the world in multiple languages, saying things that Jake could not understand in detail, but could understand in tone. The tone was, "We are still here." By noon, the major news broadcasts were back. The anchors looked different than they had 3 days before. Not professional calm in the practiced way of television news. Something rawer than that. Real, uncertain, trying to catch up. The anchor on the channel Jake found, A man named Robert Callahan at a Chicago affiliate was speaking from what appeared to be a parking lot, with a camera crew that looked like they had not slept in days. He said, "We are receiving reports from all over the world. We are receiving reports that the structures, the objects that appeared over Earth 3 days ago, are no longer present. We are looking at the sky right now and we can see we have open sky over Chicago. We have open sky over our city." His voice cracked slightly on that last sentence. He cleared his throat. "We are receiving confirmation that the same is true over London, over Beijing, over Rio de Janeiro, over Moscow, over Sydney. We are trying to confirm, we are trying to understand what happened. There are reports of debris."
He paused.
"There are reports of debris falling into the upper atmosphere. Material, crystalline material, according to observers with optical equipment, falling from the upper atmosphere and burning up on re-entry. Hundreds of thousands of small fragments. The night sky last night, in parts of the world where it was night at the time, is being described as the most extraordinary meteor shower in recorded human history." He looked at the camera. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "The structures are gone. The debris field was extraordinary." This Jake also learned later from multiple sources. When the Varek vessels failed, when their crystalline hulls reached critical resonant frequency and tore themselves apart, the destruction was complete and rapid. 14 minutes from first firing to hull failure. But the aftermath of hull failure in structures that size was not immediate. The internal systems, whatever remained of them, burned. The pieces fell slowly through the upper atmosphere, taking hours to descend. Much of it burned up on re-entry. But some pieces were large enough to survive, chunks of material that fell into oceans, into uninhabited regions, into the polar ice. Scientists would spend the next years studying that debris. What they found was extraordinary. The crystalline alloy was unlike anything in known materials science. Its internal structure was impossibly precise, engineered at the atomic level with a perfection that human manufacturing could not approach. In any other context, it would have been one of the most significant scientific discoveries in human history. But it had a flaw, a fundamental, physical flaw that no engineering could overcome, because it was not an engineering flaw. It was a physics flaw. At 17.34 Hz, that perfect crystal destroyed itself. In the days that followed, the world did not simply return to normal. It could not. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. Jake and Tom and Lily stayed at the mine for 3 more days, helping Webb's team document everything: the array configuration, the power parameters, the firing sequence, the propagation calculations. Danny Park worked without sleeping for 36 hours, writing up every formula and measurement in meticulous handwritten records. Dr. Okonkwo did the same for the materials science component. Webb insisted everything be documented in full detail. He said, "We may need this again someday. Not for the Varek, they're gone. But there may be others. And next time, I want us to be ready faster." On the 3rd day, a government vehicle appeared at the farm gate, a military sedan, plain civilian-looking, but driven by a man in uniform. He had orders for Webb. Webb went with him quietly, as if he had expected this. Before he left, he shook Jake's hand. He said, "You're a good man, Carter. Good hands, good head, good heart."
He paused.
"Your daughter is going to be remarkable," Jake said. "She already is." Webb nodded. He got in the sedan. He was gone. Jake never saw him again in person, though he heard about him, heard that he was working with the government's newly formed Planetary Defense Coordination Office, helping them understand what had happened and what it meant for the future. On the 4th day after the victory, Jake and Lily drove back to Millbrook in Tom's truck. The drive back was different from the drive out. The fields looked different. The roads looked different. The whole world looked different in a way that was hard to name, not changed, physically. The same fields, the same roads, the same small towns. But illuminated differently. Not by better light, but by the knowledge of what could have been taken. Lily rode in the back seat. She was not asleep this time. She was watching out the window. At one point she said, "Dad, do you think they knew? The Varek. Do you think they knew we were going to fight back?" Jake drove for a moment before answering. I think they thought they knew what we were capable of. I think they thought they had us figured out. Lily said, but they were wrong. Jake said, yeah, they were very wrong.
She thought about this.
Why? Jake said, because they only watched us from far away. They saw the things we broadcast into space, our signals, our technology, our official things. They saw what we show the universe. But they never came down here. They never looked at the small things. The quiet things. Lily said, like what? Jake said, like a man keeping an old truck running for 20 years because he had a feeling it might matter someday. Like a scientist writing equations on paper by hand because she knew that paper is invisible to scanners in orbit. Like a group of people going underground and doing something impossible because the alternative was losing everything. He looked at her in the rear-view mirror. Like a 7-year-old girl who doesn't cry when she should be terrified because she trusts her dad. Lily looked at him in the mirror. She said, I do trust you, Dad. Jake's throat tightened. He said, I know, baby. I know. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Lily said, SYMJHY, no more aliens coming to take our sky, okay? Jake almost laughed. Almost. He said, I'll do my best. Lily said, you always do. He drove home. When they pulled into Millbrook, the town was quiet but alive. People were out. Neighbors talking over fences, kids back in yards, a few stores with their lights on. The specific ordinary human texture of a small town that had held its breath for 4 days and was now very carefully beginning to breathe again. Their house looked exactly as they had left it. Jake's coffee mug was still on the kitchen counter. Lily's cereal bowl was still in the sink. The television was still on. The emergency broadcast had still been running on the last channel he had it set to, though now it was regular programming, a morning news show that looked surreal in its normalcy. Lily went straight to her room. Jake heard her talking to Captain Ears, explaining in a serious tone what had happened. He stood in the kitchen and listened and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, or maybe had never fully felt in quite this way. He was grateful, not in an abstract, performed way, in a physical way. The kind of gratitude that lives in the body, that makes the hands feel heavy and warm. He washed Lily's cereal bowl. He poured the remains of his 4-day-old coffee down the sink. He made a fresh pot. He sat at the table with his fresh coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the sky. Just sky. Just the ordinary, miraculous, irreplaceable sky. He thought about Dana. He thought, we made it. He thought, I kept the promise. He thought, Lily is okay. She is more than okay. She is herself, fully, completely, irrepressibly herself, in a way that no empire in any galaxy had managed to damage. 3 weeks passed. The world reorganized itself slowly, the way things do after something vast and world-changing, not all at once, not in a clear straight line, but in steps and pauses and corrections, and the grinding work of people trying to make sense of what had happened and decide what to do next. There were many questions. The biggest one was, would they come back? The answer that emerged after intense analysis of the debris, after study of the signals that had been tracked for years, after consultation with every expert available, was complex. The Varek Empire was real, and it was large. 12 vessels was not all they had. Not even close. Somewhere out there, across hundreds of light years, there was more. There was the rest of the Empire. And the rest of the Empire had sent these 12 vessels, and the rest of the Empire was going to notice, eventually, that those 12 vessels had not reported back. The question was when that would be noticed, and what would happen when it was. The scientific consensus, fragile, uncertain, but the best available, was that the Varek did not communicate faster than light. Their vessels appeared to travel faster than light, based on how quickly they had arrived, but their communications appeared to follow the same laws of physics as everything else. The nearest Varek communication relay that could be identified from signal analysis was estimated to be between 12 and 18 light-years distant. This meant that any message from Earth had already left, traveling at the speed of light. And it meant that the Empire would not know what happened for at least 12 to 18 years. 12 to 18 years. It was not much time in the cosmic scale of things. But it was not nothing. It was a generation of children. It was enough time to do a great deal if you spent it wisely. The world, to its considerable credit, seemed to understand this. The Planetary Defense Coordination Office, the organization Webb had joined, became the most important institution on Earth within months. Not because any government made it so by decree, because people demanded it. Every government on Earth contributed resources, personnel, and technology. Not perfectly, not without conflict and disagreement, but with a seriousness and urgency that had never before been applied to any multinational effort. The 3 acoustic array sites were expanded, replicated. 12 more sites were built in the first year, positioned with the same mathematical precision, using the same analog-first design principles. By the end of year 2, there were 36 sites globally. Danny Park led the expansion of the acoustic defense program. He was 29 years old, and he had a gentle, nervous energy that made him look like someone's younger brother until he started talking about resonance physics, at which point he became somebody you listened to very carefully. He published his gravity coupling discovery, not immediately, not while the danger was still raw, but eventually, in a form that made it accessible to every physicist on Earth. The paper was the most widely read scientific document since Darwin. Dr. Rachel Okonkwo became the head of materials analysis for the global debris recovery effort. The crystalline alloy fragments that had fallen to Earth were studied in laboratories on every continent. The science that came out of those studies began a revolution in materials engineering that would take decades to fully unfold. Tom Briggs went home to Millbrook. He bought a new cassette for his truck, Dolly Parton, and went back to his garden and his shortwave radio and his locked cabinet in the basement. He told Jake that if they needed him again, he would be there. Jake thought they would probably need him again. The official investigation into who had fired the arrays, because of course there was one, of course the governments of the world wanted to know who had done this without official sanction, lasted about 6 months before it was quietly wound down. The conclusion, which was never formally published but was widely understood, was essentially, some people who knew what they were doing did it, and it worked, and we are grateful they did not wait for permission. Jake was contacted by a government official, a quiet, careful woman from a department she described only as planning, who came to his house in Millbrook and sat at his kitchen table and drank his coffee and asked him about his role. He told her the truth, leaving out nothing. She listened. She asked several follow-up questions. She made notes. When she left, she paused at the door and said, "For what it's worth, Mr. Carter, you did the right thing." Jake said, "We did the only thing." She said, "Sometimes those are the same." He was not arrested.
He was not charged.
He was not officially recognized either. No medal, no ceremony. That was fine with him. He did not need a medal. He had the sky. He went back to work at the water plant 2 weeks after returning to Millbrook. His supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Phil Garrett, was clearly bursting with questions, but was professional enough not to ask them. He just said, "Good to have you back, Carter. Pipe 7 on the East Line has been giving us trouble." Jake said, "I'll take a look." He took a look. It was a coupling issue, a small, ordinary, fixable problem. He fixed it. He went back to his routine.
Coffee.
Lily's cereal. 15 minutes of cartoons. Drop off at school. Drive to the water plant. But the routine felt different now. Not lighter, exactly. More present. More real. As if the events of those 4 days had stripped away a layer of habit that had accumulated over years, and now everything was direct and immediate and worth noticing. He noticed the sky every day. He made a point of it. Lily started a project at school. Her teacher asked the class to write about something important that had happened recently. Most of the kids wrote about the arrival and departure of the Varek, scared stories, exciting stories, stories about hiding under beds or watching from windows. Lily wrote about her dad. She wrote about the drive to Kentucky in Tom's old truck and the mine, and the people in the lab who stayed awake all night to do the math right. She wrote about what her dad's hands looked like when he was working, steady and careful and sure. She wrote about the morning they came out of the mine and saw the sky. She wrote, "My dad made me a promise. He said we were going to be okay." I know he didn't know if that was true, but he made the promise anyway, because that's what you do for the people you love. You make the promise and then you do everything you can to keep it. And he kept it. Of SYMJHY. That's what I call it from now on. From now on, everything is different. My dad says we should look at the sky every day. I do. I like it. It's just sky. But it's our sky. And we got it back. Her teacher sent the essay to Jake. He read it in his truck in the school parking lot because he had stopped to drop Lily off and opened the email and started reading, and then could not drive anywhere for about 10 minutes. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and looked at the sky. Just sky. Of SYMJHY. Lily had written.
From now on.
He said it quietly to himself, testing the sound of it.
From now on. From now on.
Yeah, he thought.
From now on.
The word Caro spread through the post-event culture in an interesting way. It started with Lily's essay, which her teacher, with her permission and Jake's, posted online. It spread because it was honest and simple and said something that a lot of people were feeling but had not found words for. The kind of post that finds the right people at the right moment and then keeps finding them. People picked up the phrase Caro and used it for the moment of doing something decisive after a long period of fear. The moment of action when everything is on the line and you choose to move forward anyway. The moment when you stop waiting and start doing. Jake thought that was a good use for it. He did not tell anyone that his 7-year-old daughter had invented it in a car in the dark while the world was falling apart. He figured Lily could tell people herself when she was ready. The broader world used the months and years after the event to do something it had historically been very bad at. Cooperate. It was not perfect cooperation. It was messy and loud and full of disagreement and political conflict and all the ordinary human chaos that had always defined international relations. But underneath the mess, there was something new, a shared memory, a shared understanding held by 8 billion people simultaneously of what it felt like to have the sky taken away. That memory had weight. It changed the calculation. It made certain kinds of disagreement feel smaller than they had before. The Planetary Defense Coordination Office, called the PDCO by everyone who worked with it, became the framework through which the cooperation happened. Every nation contributed. The acoustic array network was built. Debris analysis was shared globally. Signal tracking was made an international collaborative effort. A new communication protocol, using old analog technology deliberately as a lesson learned, was established to ensure that critical defense information could be shared globally even if all digital systems were compromised. General Marcus Webb, from his position at the PDCO, pushed hard for one specific thing: education. Not just scientific education, though that was important. The education he pushed for was historical. He wanted every person on Earth to understand what had happened and how, to understand that a group of people with old trucks and paper equations and a mine in Kentucky had done what no advanced electromagnetic weapon system could do.
He wanted people to understand why.
He wanted them to understand that the Varek had failed not because they were weak. They were not weak. They were enormously powerful, by almost any measurement. They had failed because they had been arrogant, because they had assessed humanity from a distance and decided that what they could observe was all there was, because they had never come down here, because they had never sat at a kitchen table at 7 in the morning and watched a 7-year-old girl eat cereal and ask about the noise in the sky, because they had never understood what people do in the quiet places, in the small hours, in the spaces between the things that make it into signals and broadcasts and the history that gets written down. Because they had never understood what it means to be human. Jake was asked to speak at the first annual Planetary Defense Summit, 2 years after the event.
He almost said no.
He was not a speaker. He was a water plant employee from a small town in Ohio. He fixed pipes. He was not the kind of person who spoke at summits. But Webb called him personally. Webb said, "You're exactly the kind of person who should speak. That's the whole point." Jake went. He stood at a podium in front of several hundred people who were experts in defense, science, engineering, and government. He had notes, but he did not really look at them. He said, "I'm Jake Carter. I work at a water treatment facility in Millbrook, Ohio. I fix pipes. I have a daughter named Lily, who is 9 now. 3 days after the Varek arrived, I was sitting in a lab 400 feet underground, adjusting power levels on a machine I'd never used before, trying to do something the most advanced civilization in our observable neighborhood thought was impossible. And I have to be honest with you about something. I did not know it was going to work. I had no certainty. I had the math, which I only partially understood, and I had the people in that room with me, and I had my hands on a lever, and I had something to go home to.
He paused.
I think that's what the Varek didn't account for. They counted our weapons and our technology and our signal output. They counted everything we've built and broadcast. They didn't count what we do when we have something to go home to. They didn't count what an ordinary person is capable of when the alternative is losing everything. They thought they had measured us, but they measured the outside. They never looked at what's in here. He touched his chest. He paused. They had an empire. We had each other. And in 14 minutes, we had the sky back. He stepped back from the podium. The room was quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet. 5 years after the event, Lily Carter was 12 years old. She was in 7th grade. She was studying science, had been focused on it since the event, not because anyone pushed her, but because she had been in a lab at age 7 and seen what science can do, and that had planted something in her that grew on its own. She was particularly interested in acoustic physics. Her teacher, a patient woman named Mrs. Gonzalez, had arranged for her to visit Danny Park's lab at the university twice. Danny Park had recognized her name immediately. He had shaken her hand very seriously and said, "I read your essay. I read it when it first came out, before anyone knew who you were. It's the best explanation I've ever seen of what we did and why it worked." Lily had said, "I just wrote what happened." Danny had said, "That's exactly why it's good." She had walked through his lab with wide eyes, touching things carefully and asking questions he said were better than the questions he got from most graduate students. She came home from that visit and went into the kitchen where Jake was making dinner and said, "Dad, I want to be an acoustic physicist." Jake said, "Yeah?" She said, "Yeah." Jake said, "Tell me about it." She told him about it for 40 minutes. He cooked pasta and listened and asked questions that were just good enough to keep her going. He did not fully understand half of what she said. He understood enough. He understood that she was going somewhere, that she had found the thread of her life and was already pulling it. He thought about Dana a lot in those years. The grief had changed shape, not gone, never gone, but different. More like a presence than a wound. Dana in the passenger seat of his memory, watching with interest as things unfolded. He thought she would have liked Tom Briggs. He thought she would have respected Marcus Webb. He thought she would have been both proud of and slightly amused by Lily's relentless focused curiosity. He thought she would have stood at the kitchen window and looked at the sky with him. He thought she would have understood why he made the promise even when he didn't know if he could keep it. She had always understood those things about him, sometimes better than he understood them himself. He talked to her sometimes, quietly, privately, in the way that people do with the ones they love who are gone. Not believing she could hear him necessarily, but talking anyway, because some conversations deserve to keep happening even after they become one-sided. He said mostly the things he wished he had said more when she was alive. He said, "I'm okay. Lily is spectacular. I see her in Lily all the time. I kept the promise." Tom Briggs died in year 4. Not dramatically. Not in the way of people who save the world and then fall heroically. He died in his sleep, in his own bed, at 74 years old, which was exactly the way a man like Tom Briggs should go, quietly, in his own time, without drama. Jake found out in the morning, from Tom's daughter, who called him first. Jake sat in his truck in the driveway for a while. Then he went inside and sat at the kitchen table. Lily came in and looked at him and said, "What happened?" He told her. She said, "I'm sorry, Dad." She put her hand on top of his. She had her mother's hands. She sat there with him for a while without saying anything else. He thought, this is what it means to be human. This specific thing. Sitting at a kitchen table with your daughter, whose hands look like her mother's, after the man who kept a truck running for 20 years and drove you through the dark to a mine in Kentucky just died in his sleep, and feeling all of it, the grief and the love and the gratitude and the ordinary morning light coming in through the kitchen window. No empire could put a number on that. No scanner in orbit could measure it. It was not in any signal they had ever broadcast. It was just here, in the kitchen, in the specific weight of a 12-year-old girl's hand on top of her father's, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, in a small town in Ohio. In year 5, the signal detection teams picked up something. A signal from deep space, from a direction consistent with known Varek-aligned systems. The signal was carefully analyzed. It was not a communication signal. It was something different, more like a scanning pulse. Like someone looking for something. Like someone noticing that 12 ships had failed to report in and beginning to wonder why. The PDCO convened. Webb, now 70 years old, moving slowly but thinking with full precision, led the session. The conclusion was that the Varek were beginning to notice. That the response signal would take years to arrive. That they had time. Not enough time to be comfortable, but time. After the session, Webb called Jake. He said, "You heard?" Jake said, "I heard." Webb said, "We're going to need the next level. Bigger arrays, better coupling, more sites, and new thinking because they will have analyzed what happened and they will come back differently." Jake said, "New thinking like what?" Webb said, "Like whatever Danny Park comes up with. Like whatever your daughter comes up with." Jake said, "She's 12. Webb said, "She'll be older when they get here. And she's already thinking about the right things." He paused. The Varek thought they had measured everything we were capable of. They learned they were wrong. When they come back, they'll think they've measured what we did. They'll be wrong about that too. Jake said, "How do you know?" Webb said, "Because they keep making the same mistake. They think they can measure us from the outside. They can't. That's not a thing that can be done." He paused. "Caro, Jake, you know what that means?" Jake said, "I know what it means." Webb said, "Good. Start thinking about the next one." Jake sat on the porch that evening. The sky was clear. October again, 5 years to the month from the morning when Lily had looked up from her cereal and said, "Dad, what's that noise?" He could see stars. Not many, the light from the town blurred most of them, but some. A handful of bright ones in the east. He did not know their names. He knew which direction the Varek had come from, but he did not know which star to look at in connection with them, and he was fine with that. The specific star was less important than the direction. Out there. Somewhere out there, the rest of the Empire was. They would come. Maybe not soon in human terms. Maybe in 15 years, maybe 20, maybe 30. But they would come. And they would come differently. They would come knowing about the acoustic arrays, knowing about their resonant frequency, knowing to look for it. They would come knowing more than before.
But they would still not know everything.
Because every year that passed, the people on this planet, in the labs and the mines and the small rooms and the basements, were thinking, writing things on paper, building things with their hands, finding new threads and pulling them, doing the quiet work in the spaces that could not be observed from orbit. Lily would finish 7th grade, then 8th, then high school, then university, then Danny Park's lab or a lab like it, doing the next thing, finding the next gap, pulling the next thread. And there would be others like her. Thousands of them. Millions. Kids who had grown up with the memory of those 4 days, with the knowledge of what had been almost taken, and what it had taken to keep it. They would be ready in ways the Varek could not predict. Because the Varek kept making the same mistake. They thought they could look at a civilization and see all of it. They thought signal output equals total capability. They thought what is visible equals what exists. They did not understand that the most important things have no electromagnetic signature. Love has no electromagnetic signature. Memory has no electromagnetic signature. The specific sound of a 7-year-old girl explaining to her stuffed rabbit that the aliens are gone now and the sky is back, that has no electromagnetic signature. The determination of a man who makes a promise he isn't sure he can keep and then keeps it anyway, that has no electromagnetic signature. The math that Danny Park worked out on paper by hand, in a mine without a single digital device, in the knowledge that paper doesn't broadcast no electromagnetic signature. The thread. Always the thread. Lily came out and sat next to him. She had a mug of hot chocolate. She handed him a second mug. He had not heard her making 2, but she had. They sat together and looked at the sky. She said, "Dad, I've been thinking about something." He said, "Tell me." She said, "The Varek, they'll know about the acoustic system now. If they come back, they'll be ready for that. So we need something else. Something they can't predict. Jake said, "Any ideas?" She said, "A few. I want to talk to Dr. Park about one of them. It's about thermal resonance, not acoustic. Different medium, different frequency range, different physical principle."
She paused.
They'll have analyzed the acoustic system thoroughly. They'll build countermeasures. But if the physical principle is different enough, if it operates on a mechanism their analysis didn't cover, they'll have the same problem they had before. Jake said, "They'll have measured the thing they know about." Lily said, "And we'll be doing the thing they don't know about." She sipped her hot chocolate. Jake sipped his. He said, "SYMJHY, your mother would be so proud of you." Lily said, "From now on, everything different." He said, "Yeah." She said, "She'd be proud of you too, Dad." Jake looked at the sky. The stars, the ordinary, irreplaceable, fought for sky. He said, "I hope so, baby." She put her head on his shoulder. They sat there in the October evening, in the quiet of a small town that had kept its sky, in a light of stars that were very far away, and they stayed that way for a long time without saying anything more. Because some things don't need words. Because sometimes the most important thing is simply to be present, fully, completely present, in the ordinary moments that the universe is always trying to take from you, and that you spend your whole life working to keep. Jake Carter, who fixed pipes and made coffee and had a daughter with her mother's eyes and hands, looked at the sky and felt, in his chest, in his hands, in his feet on the porch boards of a small house in a small town in Ohio, the weight and the gift and the extraordinary, ordinary miracle of everything he had. The Varek had called humanity insufficient. Jake thought. They had no idea. They had never sat on a porch in October with their daughter and looked at stars they had earned. They had never understood what that costs and what it means to keep it. The Empire had sent 12 ships. The Empire had measured Earth's electromagnetic output, calculated its military capacity, assessed its threat level, and concluded. Insufficient. The Empire had given Earth 72 hours. Earth had given the Empire 14 minutes. In 14 minutes, an empire built across hundreds of star systems, older than human civilization by orders of magnitude, with technology that made humanity's best look like cave drawings. In 14 minutes, that empire lost 12 ships, 400 feet of crystalline hull material that burned up as the most spectacular meteor shower in recorded history, and the unshakable certainty that they understood the species that lived on this small, blue, noisy, stubborn planet. They had been watching Earth for decades. They had seen everything that could be seen from orbit. They had not seen the man who kept an old truck running for 20 years. They had not seen the woman who wrote equations on paper by hand. They had not seen the physicist who figured out gravity coupling in a mine with no digital devices. They had not seen the 7-year-old girl who looked at her father and said, "Caro, from now on, everything is different." They had not seen any of it. And that, in the end, was the only gap that mattered.
Yendi.